Hi, John and Joan here yet again for week 5. Now, week 5 is going to be very, very similar to the session 2 weeks ago. It's going to be in the LRC. The students are going to be seeing simulated patients again. This time, however, hopefully we're going to merge the content with the process. So, for the 10 minutes before the start of the session, one of us are going to be at the LRC to answer any of your questions or any other problems you have. Please feel free. If you're very comfortable, that's fine too. We're just going to be there in case anyone wants some help. We'll start again with a small group tutorial with the tutors before we go on to the SPs. Now in this one, we still need to briefly review some of the things that have gone before. It's really important we re-emphasize the communication process skills. That's sort of the Calgary-Cambridge Guide and Patient-Centered Clinical Method, as well as the medical history that you did last week. But it's very, very easy for the content to chase out the process and to get into process problems because we're not paying attention to it. So it is important to think about the process and how the information is being collected, as well as the information itself. We'd really like you in that tutorial to review the what questions, the what, when, why, where, how questions, the 5 questions, feelings, ideas, functions, expectations, a bit about the personal and social history and family history, and how this enables the physician to understand where the patient's coming from, what their views are, what their needs are. We will have some patients who have different cultural pieces today. They're probably not going to be in terms of race or something like that, because we've got very, very few SPs who can do this. But they will have different views that the students must take into account. And again, in the opening tutorial, we'd really like you to go over some of the things like linkages and transitions. How do you get from one point of the interview to another point of the interview? And reminding about things like summarizing, both as a linkage device, as a device for the student to understand what they've heard, as a device for the student to check with the patient, so that the patient knows what the physician has heard. And also as a way to move the interview along. And lastly, we also want you to do some discussion of difficult, sensitive questions, and that some of that will come up in this interview, and that's still a point that students have very, very great problems with.
Okay, and I'd like to talk a little bit as well that one of the pitfalls that we often find when we start to focus on content, and John has alluded to it, is that the students just focus on content and tend to forget about the process skills, about how you elicit information and how you do it in a patient-centered way. One of the ways that that's evident is that as soon as the patient states what they're there for, the student immediately launches into the closed-ended questions. When did the pain start? How long have you had it? Going into some of the WH questions very early in the interview. What we're asking you to do in relation to feedback is to encourage the students to keep things very open and exploratory and not interrupt the patient initially, so that the patient can explain more about what they mean about or what they mean by, or tell me more about, so that the student gets as much information up front in the interview as possible and then has more to base their WH questions and 5 questions on later.
And in this session, we're also going to ask the students to partner up with a different partner. And that's so that they see different techniques and they don't get into a rut. I was discussing with one of my buddies from this stage at medical school, 35 years ago we were there, our communication skills. And he sort of said, I still forget to ask those questions because those were the ones you always asked. And I think I do the same. So it's important that they see different people, and that's the idea. After this session is over, the simulated patient session, and again, a small closing debriefing tutorial, really valuable again to ask each student the main thing they've learned today and to let them talk about the interview experience and deburden themselves with some of the things. Usually, they're not quite so tired at this session. Usually, they're getting into it now and they're understanding what's going on more. So they're more able to talk and discuss at this session than the one 2 weeks ago.
Another good strategy in that closing tutorial is to ask students as a group what are the challenges that they're experiencing, or you may have already been noticing it. And what do you see as the challenges that the entire group is experiencing, and to raise those challenges for discussion. What were the strengths? So you might get a group feedback session going. And as we've alluded to, the process for the interviews is the same as the previous time that we were in the Learning Resource Center, with the student and the student interviewing always giving feedback first, then the simulated patient, and then finally yourself facilitating a discussion as well. So I don't think there's too much more to add for this week, is there?
If you see any students that you have problems with, particularly if they're the same students you may have seen with problems in the first session, please take a note of them. We need to know, because we may be able to offer them some additional help if necessary. And that would be an additional help. It wouldn't be remedial help. It's an adjunct session.
Yeah, and I would encourage you, if there is a student who is struggling that you're concerned about, to actually discuss that with them. And here's that discussion based on your feedback, that you can provide that learner so that, again, it's descriptive, what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what the significance of that is, and ask them how they feel they're doing, of course, what would help them. And it may be something very simple that could be happening in each of the sessions that you're working with that learner about too. So, but if all else is being done and the student would still like some extra help or benefit from it, then yes, we can put on an adjunct session, and with more than one learner, because there will be more than one learner who may need it.